Welcome to episode 7 of Life by a Thousand Words. Today's topic is racism. I have lived in the suburbs of LA most of my life, and the majority of my first-hand experience with racism came from other minorities, including Hispanics, blacks, and even other Asians. In 4th grade, I was one of very few Asian kids in a largely Hispanic neighborhood. I was repeatedly taunted with a Spanish rhyme which went, Chino, Chino, Japonés, come caca, no me des. Roughly translated, it means Chinese, Japanese, eat shit, but don't give me any. In 5th grade, I was punched in the face and literally knocked out by a black girl for responding in kind to her telling me, shut up, Chink. And in 6th grade, an otherwise soft-spoken and very feminine Indian girl called me a beady-eyed Chink for some offense I can no longer remember. If I had a better memory, I could probably recount a racist incident almost every year of my life. No doubt that some of my own outbursts could be interpreted as being racist. I recently watched the CEO of one of the largest American corporations with hundreds of thousands of employees publicly address the current racial tensions by streaming a lengthy online interview with a BLM and affirmative action supporter. Unchallenged, this man promoted the black victimhood narrative, and the CEO passively but officially endorsed a political agenda that was considered radical even a couple of years ago. Other major American corporations are increasingly embracing the same progressive agenda. While one half of this country seems to be increasingly emboldened to express extremist views, like slavery reparations and violence against cops, the other half fears that even voicing an unpopular opinion can jeopardize their careers and even their safety. I'm surrounded by people who believe that racism is one of the greatest social injustices of our time. I am familiar with the arguments in favor of mass protests, hardcore police reforms, affirmative action, and other proposals to address racism in America. Perhaps more so than the vast majority of their proponents who do not want to even hear arguments on the other side. Systemic racism is a term often repeated by those that do not tolerate opposing views very kindly. If you say you don't agree that law enforcement or businesses or schools or even America as a nation are systemically racist, you will be called a racist. There is no middle ground. Even your silence is said to cause racial violence. Unless you join the mobs, you can be targeted. Many Americans have been beaten with a club of ideological submission in the hands of the self-righteous. My house has been egged twice in the past week. We have since been informed by the social justice warriors of the local social media that our imaginary racism does far more harm than the dozen or so real eggs on our house. Like all other social ills, racism is rooted in sin and is completely explicated in a biblical framework. But unfortunately, the loudest voices for racial justice categorically reject the biblical perspective. Instead of recognizing the universal condition of sin which causes racism in all peoples, they slander the legacy of our nation which fought a bloody civil war to end slavery and recently elected a black president twice, not to mention the 50-plus years of costly welfare and preferential treatment that were given to blacks. Antifa, a real fascist group of domestic terrorists, and BLM, an actual racist group founded by trained Marxists, supported by Democrats who see an opportunity for election year political gains, have somehow convinced themselves and many young people that those who do not support their movement are the racists who support fascism. The irony here is just too rich to unravel neatly. Throughout history, followers of Jesus Christ, many of them American, have consistently opposed slavery and other forms of racism, including Nazism, one of the most virulent forms of scientific racism, which is rooted in the Darwinian framework that certain subspecies of the human race have acquired superior traits over millions of years of evolution. The same Darwinian framework undergirds Marxist atheism, which justified the murder of tens of millions of people under each of the Soviet and Chinese strains of Marxism called Soviet Socialism and Chinese Communism. Cuba, Venezuela, and North Korea are other nations ravaged by this same ideological virus of Marxism and Darwinism. On the other hand, under the biblical worldview, all humans are image bearers of God, our Creator. This view was foundational to the American ideal that all men are created equal and that slavery is evil. Every living person today is only about 100 generations from a common human ancestor. Racism is simply incompatible with the biblical worldview. Real is the sin of racism, and great its historical injury. However, I believe that most of the recent politics and media-driven racial narratives are dishonest and extremely harmful to our society. Feeding the fire of racial discontent only increases its appetite. Misinformed rage and political correctness are not the answer. We must overcome racism as with any other sin, by repentance and by the unifying gospel of truth of Jesus Christ. May the truth set you free.